Hello and welcome to Kolkata's first and India's only literary festival, Apeejay Kolkata Literary Festival, curated by Oxford Bookstore. As we celebrate the 13th edition of the APJ Kolkata Literary Festival, it gives me immense pleasure to host today's session, A God at the Door, a beam of hope and resilience. We have with us poet, writer, and dancer Tishani Doshi, who has published 7 books of poetry and fiction. An unexpected encounter with the legendary choreographer Chandralekha led Doshi to a serious career in dance. Tishani Doshi is widely acclaimed as a creative writer. Her first book of poetry, Countries of the Body, won a Forward Prize for the Best First Collection. Doshi's first novel, The Pleasure Seekers, was shortlisted for the Hindu Literary Prize and longlisted for the Orange Prize and the International Impact Dublin Literary Award. Tishani Doshi's stunning new poetry collection, A God at the Door, published by HarperCollins, tackles hypernationalism and misogyny head on, transforming collective grief, anger, and loneliness into a beam of hope and resilience. In conversation with Tishani Doshi today, we have with us an academician and poet, Dr. Jhilam Chattaraj. Her works have been published at Room, Porridge, Not Very Quiet, Queen Mob's Tea House, Colorado Review, World Literature Today, and Asian Cha, among others. She has received the CTI Excellence Award in Literature and Soft Skill Development in 2019 from the Council for Transforming India and the Department of Language and Culture, Government of Telangana, India. We are delighted to welcome you to the virtual platform and we will look forward to an interesting session. Over to you, Dr. Jhilam Chattaraj, to take the discussion.
Thank you, Ritlina, for that lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. I welcome you all to the APJ Kolkata Literary Fest. It's the glorious 13th edition curated by Oxford Bookstores. Today, I'm very privileged and honored to be in conversation with Tishani Doshi, a contemporary poet and a novelist whose new book is out, A God at the Door. And our conversation is titled A God at the Door, a beam of hope and resilience. Let me begin by saying a few words on the book, and then, of course, I'll show you the book. A God at the Door is an avalanche of visceral experiences. Tishani's poems come with a causal energy, one that spins reality around its axis. Tishani's rage, humor, revision, empathy attempt to articulate a world that I feel is presently, turning and turning in the widening gyre. And I often wondered that who is this God in Tishani's book? What kind of a God is it? Is it like the Yetsian God, the rough beast, slouching towards Bethlehem? And I was very curious to know the kind of descent that she portrays in this book. Is it an evocation of P.B. Shelley, Sylvia Plath, Virginia Woolf, or simply a lover's quarrel with the world, as Robert Frost said? And, in this conversation, we will be exploring the complexity, the beauty, and the relevance of Tishani's poetry in present times fraught with such uncertainty and absurdity. Everyone, my listeners, our listeners, and our audience today, here is the beautiful book, Tishani Doshi's A God at the Door. This is the Indian edition, and it has been published by HarperCollins. Yes.
This is okay. I've got the UK one.
So, yes.
At the moment.
Please get it. It is available at Oxford Bookstores, both offline and online, oxfordbookstores.com. Get the book as soon as possible. Okay. Hello, Tishani. How have you been? So good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction to the poems. I'm well, in a kind of quiet space after a very busy end of the year, and trying to gather up some energies and go into a new writing project, I hope.
First of all, I want to congratulate you God at the Door has been shortlisted for the Forward Poetry Prize 2021. Could you tell us a little about your book and, of course, this intriguing title? And, in times like these, when we are again, at the surge of the third wave is around, and again, there's uncertainty around, what can readers expect from your book?
I think, I've written these poems over a few years, but probably I think of it very much as the book coming into its own during the start of the pandemic, and throughout it, I wrote, I was very grateful to be writing poems, which in some way was allowing me to comprehend what was going on around me and to hold all of it. And I wouldn't say that it was cathartic or that it was helpful in any sense, except that it allowed me to just find certain touchstones that I think I was missing. You mentioned I worked as a dancer for many years, and I think during this moment, these last 2 years, I barely danced, and I felt that physical restraint of being inside a lot more, and not feeling that sense of movement or freedom of movement. And in a way, I guess I've been trying to grapple with that in poetry to try and understand not just my situation, but this effect and this sense of being blocked for people all over the world, and the uncertainty of it and the continuing uncertainty of it. And so the poems were really about trying to return to certain things that we could claim for, and I use the word holy here, but in a kind of way to say that it could range from an idea of God or spirituality, but it could also range to a cloud, it could range to a stone, it could range to a tree. So the sense of what can we hold on to in these moments, and how do we explain it to ourselves? So I think that's what I was thinking about, the idea of thresholds, therefore the God at the door. What are the thresholds that we inhabit? What do we have to leave behind to go into this new space? How do we occupy this territory of neither here nor there? And so the poems are very much, I think, skittering between these different edges and trying to make a home for themselves,
That's beautiful. And I think all we need at this time is hope. And we look forward to your book for that. Several of your poems in this collection, they focus on very worldly information, on facts, on news. I'm very curious to know that when you receive a certain kind of information, who is tempted first to respond to that? Is it poet Tishani Doshi? Is it the political citizen in you? Or is it the pleasure lover who wants to react to it? What tempts you also to respond to news in this way?
I think, it's very difficult for us to hide from the news these days. Believe me, I have tried. I live in a quite isolated situation most of the year. And part of it was wanting to try to create some sense of space and buffer, because that crush of news was overwhelming. And just sometimes that sense of how do you make a slowed down space, or, I've always been very interested in that idea of slowness and how to create that in one's life. And I think I was quite overwhelmed these past 2 years about my own reaction to the news, because as you say, a lot of the poems are responses to bits of news items that I've either heard on the radio or newspaper. And what I'm trying to insinuate that poetry can do as an intervention in this moment of being alive, which seems to us so fraught and so intense, in every way. And I think partly the poems have different purposes for different events. And sometimes it's about humor, sometimes it's about rage, sometimes it's like, is it possible to bring the feeling of a lyric into something as mundane and as time bound as the daily news? And what can a poem do in that space? So in some senses, these are experimental poems, but they also feel the only poems that I could have written, because so much of the stimulus for the last 2 years have been coming, for me at least, from the outside world and what I'm receiving. And really, the sense of being bombarded by this barrage of news. And so the poems are a way to deflect, but also, again, to sort of to see whether something else can be made of it, something other than just this momentary glance to say, oh, that's sad, or oh, that's difficult, and then move on to the next. So the poem is like slowing it down and saying, stay in this for a while, and try to move it into some other state of emotion, which I think poems in general are carriers of this, metaphoric or revelatory vehicles, in a way that they can begin with one thing and they end with something else. And something quite marvelous about the movements in a poem, because they're such small creations, and they're able to make such big leaps.
Absolutely. I love the idea of seeing a poem as a movement and as a vehicle, of taking information from one place to the other and doing it slowly. On that note, it would be lovely if you read us something.
Sure. So I'll read this poem called Tree of Life. And this was directly inspired by a headline from last year from the Hindustan Times: Bengal men self-quarantine on tree to keep others safe. This was March 30th, 2020. And it was a story about 7 men who were walking home in those days when there was a mass exodus of millions from cities back to their villages when the country went into the first lockdown. And this story really stayed with me, because there was something about the fact that they were taking shelter in a tree. And it's interesting how the mind has these associative jumps. I was thinking of Satyajit Ray and Patho Panchali and the forest and the trees, and this kind of mix of something romantic and tragic at the same time. And so the poem came from that. Tree of Life. It could be romantic to sleep in a tree with all the sounds of the forest around, insect cacophony, elephants in must. I have always loved the word rut, a seasonal glut, the opposite of looking through a window to a never-ending view of wives washing dishes in the sink, Simone de Beauvoir's idea of the domestic abyss. But reader, she had silk curtains and chandeliers. She had multiple lovers and appointments with Sartre in the Jardin du Luxembourg. It is dangerous to romanticize anyone's life, especially low, to purge the nobility of the poor. So let me not say how much I cried watching Satyajit Ray's Patho Panchali, especially the part with the kids running through fields of cash to watch the train of modernity pass. More poignant if you know the director's wife had to pawn her jewels for the film to be made. The goodness of some women, they almost levitate, like the girl in the film, Child of the Forest, how she picks thorns from her feet like stones from rice. And the crone, how I love the crone, how all this sadness builds like a raga to bring on rain, which the girl rushes into a coarse ripple of water lilies, siege of cranes, how all this joy leads to death. There are no spare rooms is the point. In the film or real life, there are no spare rooms. So these men who returned from the city are put in a tree to quarantine, a tree that strangles its host as it walks, munificent shade-giving banyan that hurls down roots as trunks, in whose leaves God Krishna is domiciled. Krishna, who talks good game about the temporality of the body while enjoying the bliss of so many pretty bodies, understood the material world as one huge inverted banyan. And as we're here in this reflection, why not enjoy the fruits? Why not leap from branch to branch like a hoopoe, which these men do, I suppose. Their good wives leave supplies at the base, rice and oil, cooking implements. It goes like this for days. The story of 7 men in a tree surviving a 21st century pandemic. Men who say they're pleased not to pass on any bad city virus. And because the news is so full of horrors and counterfeits, can we for once just succumb to the romance before us? Forget that the tree is moving, that one day its phantom limbs will tap against our door. Till then, can't we stand by our windows and stare at all the desolation and sweetness? Can't we adore the convoluted roots of our attachment? How they complete us. My God, how this living is a hymn.
Thank you. That was amazing. One thing I just love about your work is this range of ideas that you put it together. And even when you're talking about something so, absurdly painful, and then you still have the idea to put in the details of Satyajit Ray's wife pawning her jewels. And it just fits in so beautifully there. And as I was reading your work, I was just stunned by the structures, the textures, the voices, the shapes. And I see it as a fertile repository of a poet's knowledge of the world. And in one poem, you talk about you're carrying your uterus in a suitcase. And then there's another where we have how the Brazilian butt job won't save women. And your range is unfathomable. And I'm just wondering on that note, like, is there a guiding principle that you curate this, based on which you curate these poems and you bring them together in the collection? And yeah.
I think it's hard to say, because the poems, they don't belong to the collection when they're written. They're just individual poems, and so they have to work by themselves. And then there's this strange, because I never work with the idea of a big project, at least I haven't so far. So it's always just poem by poem by poem, and then suddenly saying, okay, these poems go in a book. And in a way, so then the guiding principle becomes this sense of, I suppose, is the poem managing to do many things for me. I feel like a poem should have many layers. So I don't want to just have that one layer of the poem. I want complexity in what I read. That's what I enjoy. And I like the idea of play as well, and so I also think register is very important. I think of myself as a serious person, and I take poetry very seriously. But I also like to laugh, and I'm also interested in making fun of myself and trying to poke holes in things when you find yourself becoming too, I don't know, you can get too maudlin, or you can get too muchness of anything. And so I want to investigate those things, and I want to see whether it's possible to arrive and shift through different emotional range within the same poem. So whether it's possible to even laugh in a poem that is quite sad with content matter, or not even laugh, just smile, to shift this emotional palette, to not just be hitting one emotional register. Because I find as a reader, that's when I feel most affected, when I find myself suddenly moving from one emotion to another. And I wonder, how did that writer do that, And I think partly it's being able to look at the world in a way that you can receive the weirdness of the world, its strange juxtapositions all at once, and understand that nothing is ever one-sided. There is never any one emotional tone. And so for me, I want the poem to have that kind of richness, for it to jump, and this notion of play, which I guess also includes a little bit of irreverence towards oneself, but also to the world, and to, again, this sense of received notions, to be the sort of poet who is who's poking a little bit and saying, is it really so? Is it like this? And to joke and to laugh, because honestly, what else do we have? I mean, we could sit in the corner crying all day, and all of us do, but to some degree, because we're surrounded by so much to be in real horror about. But I think that laughter and joy are very radical ideas, and have been used as modes of resistance. So I think taken together, I'm interested in how to bring in these different emotional effects. And different poems have different ratios. Some are more like this, some are more like that. And it's also interesting how poems shift in their own way. So the Brazilian butt lift began with one particular idea, hearing this news about a particular plastic surgery where women were injecting fat into their bottoms. And then actually some of them died doing this. And I was trying to think, what good is it to have the body that you desire if you're not there to inhabit that body? And then it becomes quite dark, this sort of like a funny kind of weird news story. And then you think, what does this mean? And how can that then be worked into the poem? And again, like I said, it's not that I'm always trying to say, what can I use and what can I make? But just that something stay with you image-wise, and you feel compelled to address it in a poem.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the emotional range is like, it's marvelous. It's like it begins with something, and there's like, you're punching me right in the face in the middle somewhere, and then you're consoling the reader by the end. Like, it's all right, it's okay. And, it would be nice if you read the poem, I carry my uterus in a suitcase. It's like really short, but it's very effective. I mean, it would be lovely for readers to, I think, listen to that. And then we could move on with the next question.
Yeah. So this poem is a really tiny little poem. And I thought it would be longer, but then I just thought, no, that's it. The poem is done. And there was nothing else to say. And it's one of the many shaped poems in the book. So I'll just show you the shape. It is like this, upturned triangle, a yoni. And it's called, I carry my uterus in a small suitcase. I carry my uterus in a small suitcase for the day I need to leave it at the railway station. Till then, I hold on to my hysteria and take my nettle tea with gin. So that poem it's super small, but I think there's certain words that then open up into a galaxy, So the word hysteria, for instance, once you understand that this is the Greek word for the womb, and all of that, and then the whole history of women's sort of psychology and illness, and the idea of what women have really gone through. It contains that in just that word hysteria.
An excellent poem. I mean, I think research papers and PhD thesis can be done on this alone, and the way the word hysteria works. And I mean, different people will have different interpretations. I mean, that's what I think brilliant poets do. They just leave it out there, and then it creates all the chaos of interpretations out there. I was wondering, which poem was the toughest to write in this collection for you?
I think there were a few. There were a few because I think there was also some sense of finding the right tone. So there's a poem called After Shooting at a Maternity Clinic in Kabul. And I tried to write that many times, that poem. And eventually I felt, okay, this is the poem. And I think that this poem can hold the occasion that I'm trying to write about. But it was very difficult to write, partly because it was such a horrible, horrific story and such a horrific act that it's, when we say, oh, words fail you or something like this, I think in moments of extreme trauma or difficulty, there's this sense where we don't have the language to make meaning of something. And it is in exactly those moments where I feel that poets have to do this work of creating the language, again, not to actually understand why something like this would happen, but just to be able to stay with this and to look at it and to have all the complicated feelings you're having about it. So we still need language. We can't just do away with language, is what I'm saying. And I think like, so there are sometimes stories, poems, particularly I'm talking about the ones that are sort of triggered by events, news events. So outside oneself, outside, so not affecting me directly, but in a different place with people I don't know. And what does it mean to be also this bystander? And I think so many of us are so uncomfortable with this position that we have become because of social media and because of the way that we are made to consume news, the way that it's fed to us, that we are forced to be permanent bystanders all the time to everything, whether it's horrible videos of lynchings or whether it's stories of men going to a maternity clinic. I mean, who does that? Who does that? That is the who thinks let's do that? And so I think that's the sort of feeling of despair, I think. And also, I guess, ultimately a question of saying, well, how are we also complicit within these cycles of violence as consumers of this news, of these videos? And what role then does, how do we grapple with this double violence that is happening, the violence that is there, and then the violence that keeps repeating?
Correct. And I think in many of the poems you have addressed the social media landscape, its language and what's happening around. And personally, your Instagram account is fascinating. And also you have, I'm not stalking, I'm just saying as a fan, someone who's seen your Instagram account. But yeah, I mean, there's this one poem in this book, I don't want to be remembered for my last Instagram post. And it's beautifully narrates all the complexities and the opposites that we are forced to reconcile in social media. How do you personally reconcile this relationship between published poetry and social media? How do you kind of see it or use social media, or you could say poets could use? What would be a healthy way of addressing this?
I mean, I don't know that there's one way. I think, and I don't know that anything can be healthy, because the nature of social media is that it's addictive. So it's like, one is understanding that this is how this system works, and understanding whether you can, it's very important to be. I like certain platforms. I like Instagram very much, and I found it to be a nice addition for my life. Wonderful invitations, wonderful collaborations, interactions with readers, and so nice things have happened. And I think in general, I feel that, like with all technology, it's how you use it, and knowing how to place your filters and how to kind of put the boundaries. But I think in general, there's just a sense, an increasingly difficult sense of valuing or keeping sacred a sense of time and reality and space that we are losing, and we are escaping. It's escaping from us, if that makes sense, and not realizing this, and suddenly 2 hours have gone and you've been in this wormhole. And I feel in that sense a kind of shock, and I'm sure everybody can understand this. And I think for me personally, I want to remember what it was like to be bored. I don't remember what it was to be bored, because the minute I'm bored, I just pick up my phone, and so I feel that there also needs to be these dead spaces and dead time when nothing much is happening, but your brain is not like trying to look for the next dopamine hit for whatever reason, or just some useless thing that you want to fill your mind with something. So just to be in a kind of, dead space. So I think we've forgotten that. And I'm really interested in what happens creatively when your mind is in that space. So really, for me, it's more of a creative thing. It's wonderful to feel a sense of community. Like I said, I live a very isolated life a lot of the time. So I think I'm not a person who lives in a city where I have access to people all the time and I do things. So I like the sense of a community and not feeling like I need to be in the center of things to be part of a conversation. I think I can still do it living in Paramankeni where I am now, through this medium, which is very powerful. So I think, yeah, it's very, very powerful. But also my sense is how to kind of just, detach myself from it and to be able to understand that not everything goes on there, and that you still need to go into real life to find other sort of other kind of time zones, other kind of spaces which are not the virtual space, and those are not the relationships, those are not the that is not everything that exists. It is just this funny ether that we find ourselves in. But we can monitor and control it. And I think it would be beneficial if we did it. I think we all know this. It's like saying, don't sit and eat sugar from morning to night. We all know that, And then at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, we're like, oh, I just need a little bit of chocolate. So that's how it is.
Just one last question, if you could answer me quickly. I mean, you're a poet, you write novels, but is there any, you get a lot of appreciation for your work and recognition. Is there anything that you're tired of hearing? That as a poet, is there anything that you don't want to hear anymore?
No, I can't think of anything now. I think what I'm more interested in really is the question of discovery, and I feel that in some ways I'm always trying to challenge for myself to kind of keep making discoveries in poetry, in literature, in language, and to not just be settled with what is already available, so I don't get tired of anything in poetry, and and if I do, it's not, I don't get annoyed by it. I just, like, again, it's like the filter system is something that we have, so we can use it, but I think it's more about opening up. I really I'm interested in really opening up to be able to find new avenues and new things, and always wanting to be surprised, and I think it's also what I look for in my own work, and what I look for as a reader is how can I be surprised, and that's really something that I think is a magical quality with which language can do, is it can make these shifts that we were talking about, and so you begin with this particular feeling, and by the end you have moved very far, even though you have just been sitting in a chair or wherever. And so this sense of largening space and largening imagination is what I'm interested in.
Lovely. Thank you, Tishani. It was wonderful talking to you. I wish we had more time. We could go on and on, but we can't. And I hope you explore all the vacant spaces, and you are surprised, and you come up with work that surprises us, your readers as well. And on that note, we will conclude our conversation with Tishani Doshi on her book, God at the Door. Please go get it soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was lovely. Thank you.